Maya-chan had always believed that her grandfather was just a simple fisherman who lived by the coast. But everything changed on the night of her 16th birthday when she discovered a strange wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards of his old cottage. The box was covered in symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, and inside it lay a map made of leather so old that it felt like it might crumble at any moment in her trembling hands. Her grandfather had passed away 3 months earlier, leaving Maya with nothing but questions and an empty house that smelled of salt and memories she could not quite hold on to. She had come to clean out his belongings, expecting to find fishing nets and worn boots. But instead, she found herself staring at something that looked like it belonged in a museum or perhaps in a fairy tale. The map showed an island that Maya had never seen on any atlas or geography book, and there were words written in a language she did not recognize at all. She sat on the dusty floor of her grandfather's bedroom, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement that she had never experienced before in her ordinary life. Maya was a quiet girl who spent most of her time reading books in the library or walking alone on the beach near her small town. And adventures were things that happened to other people in the stories she loved to read. But now, an adventure had come looking for her, wrapped in old leather and hidden secrets. The next morning, she took the map to her best friend Lucas, who lived in the house next to the post office where his mother worked, sorting letters and packages. Lucas was the kind of person who could fix anything with his hands and figure out any puzzle with his quick mind. And Maya knew that if anyone could help her understand the map, it would be him. He spread the leather across his kitchen table, his dark eyes growing wide as he traced the strange symbols with his finger. "This is incredible," he whispered, looking up at Maya with pure wonder written across his face. "Do you know what it means?" she asked, leaning closer to see what he was seeing. Lucas shook his head slowly, but kept studying the map like it was the most fascinating thing he had ever encountered. "The symbols look ancient, maybe older than anything I have ever seen in books," he said, pulling out his phone to take pictures. "But look here," he continued, pointing to a spot on the map where a red X had been marked with what looked like dried blood or very old paint. Someone wanted to remember this place very badly. Maya felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized that her grandfather had been keeping an enormous secret for his entire life. Who was he really, and what had he been doing before he settled down in their quiet coastal town? She needed answers, and she knew that the only way to find them was to follow the map to wherever it led. Lucas looked at her with a knowing smile because he could always read her thoughts like they were written on her forehead. "You want to find this place, don't you?" he asked, already knowing what her answer would be. Maya nodded, her determination growing stronger with every passing second. "My grandfather left this for me to find," she said firmly, "and I am going to discover why." That evening, they began to plan their journey in secret, because they knew that the adults in their lives would never allow two teenagers to chase after a mysterious map to an unknown island. Maya told her mother that she was going camping with Lucas and some friends from school, while Lucas convinced his mother that he was staying at his cousin's house in the city for a week. It was not entirely honest, but Maya felt that her grandfather would have understood because he had clearly been a man of secrets himself. They gathered supplies in Lucas's garage, filling backpacks with food, water bottles, flashlights, a first aid kit, and everything else they could think of for a journey into the unknown. Lucas also brought his father's old compass and a knife that had belonged to his grandfather, because he believed in being prepared for anything. 3 days later, they stood at the harbor in the early morning mist, staring at a small boat that belonged to an old sailor named Captain Torres. Captain Torres was a weathered man with skin like leather and eyes that had seen too much of the ocean's mysteries. And he was the only person Maya knew who might be willing to take them where they needed to go. She had saved every bit of money she had earned from her part-time job at the bookstore, and she offered it all to the captain in exchange for his help. He looked at the map for a long time without speaking, his expression impossible to read. Finally, he looked up at Maya with something like recognition in his old eyes. "You are Chun's granddaughter," he said, and it was not a question. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat because this stranger knew her grandfather. "He told me someone might come with this map one day," Captain Torres continued, folding it carefully and handing it back to her. "He paid me well to wait and to be ready." Maya could not believe what she was hearing, and she exchanged a shocked look with Lucas. Her grandfather had planned for this moment, perhaps even before she was born. "Will you take us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old captain smiled, revealing teeth yellowed by years of coffee and sea air. "I made a promise to a good man," he said, gesturing for them to climb aboard his boat, "and I always keep my promises." As the boat pulled away from the harbor, Maya watched her hometown grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the morning fog. She did not know what lay ahead, but she felt in her heart that she was finally doing what she was meant to do. The ocean stretched before them like an endless blue promise, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the lost city was waiting. The journey across the open ocean took 5 long days and 4 even longer nights, and Maya learned very quickly that she was not built for life on a boat. Her stomach twisted and turned with every wave, and she spent the first 2 days hanging over the side of the vessel, feeling absolutely miserable. Lucas handled the sailing much better than she did, and he spent his time learning everything he could from Captain Torres about navigation, knots, and reading the weather by looking at the clouds. "Your friend is a natural sailor," the captain told Maya on the 3rd morning when she finally felt well enough to eat some bread and drink some water. "And you have your grandfather's stubborn spirit, which will serve you well where we are going." Maya wanted to ask him more about her grandfather, but Captain Torres was a man of few words who preferred silence to conversation. Every time she tried to learn more about what her grandfather had been doing with the map, the old captain would simply shake his head and say that it was not his story to tell. On the 4th night, a terrible storm found them in the middle of nowhere, with waves as tall as buildings crashing against their small boat. Maya had never been so terrified in her entire life as she clung to the mast with her arms wrapped tight and her eyes squeezed shut. The wind screamed like a living thing, and rain fell so hard that it felt like needles against her skin. Captain Torres shouted orders to Lucas, who moved through the chaos with surprising calmness, tying ropes and adjusting sails like he had been doing it his whole life. Maya felt completely useless as she watched them fight against nature's fury. She could only hold on and pray that they would survive until morning. When the sun finally rose on the 5th day, the storm had passed and the sea was calm again, sparkling like a field of diamonds under the golden light. Maya could hardly believe they were still alive, and she hugged Lucas so tight that he laughed and told her she was crushing his ribs. "Look," Captain Torres called out, pointing toward the horizon with a weathered hand. Maya turned and felt her heart stop beating for just a moment. There before them was an island that seemed to rise from the water like a dream made real, with tall cliffs covered in green jungle and beaches of sand so white it almost hurt to look at. This was the place on the map, the island that should not exist, and yet there it was. As they sailed closer, Maya noticed something strange about the cliffs. There were carvings in the rock, enormous faces that stared out at the ocean with eyes that seemed to follow their boat as it approached. "Who made those?" Lucas asked in a hushed voice filled with wonder and a little bit of fear. "The people who lived here long ago," Captain Torres answered, steering the boat toward a small cove hidden between 2 of the carved cliffs. "Your grandfather spent years trying to learn their secrets." The boat scraped against the sandy bottom of the shallow cove, and Captain Torres dropped anchor while Maya and Lucas jumped into the warm water and waded to shore. The beach was unlike anything Maya had ever seen, with strange shells scattered across the sand and flowers growing in colors she did not even have names for. She felt like she had stepped into another world entirely. "I will wait here for 3 days," Captain Torres called from the boat, his voice carrying across the water. "If you do not return by then, I will have to leave." Maya wanted to argue, to ask him to wait longer, but she knew that he had already done more than anyone could expect. She raised her hand in thanks and then turned to face the jungle that rose up before them like a green wall. Lucas pulled out the map and studied it carefully, comparing the drawings to the landscape around them. "There should be a path somewhere near the biggest carved face," he said, looking up at the cliffs. "It leads to something called the Temple of Echoes, according to these symbols." They found the path hidden behind a curtain of vines, and Maya used the knife Lucas had brought to cut through the thick plants that blocked their way. The jungle was alive with sounds she had never heard before, birds calling out in strange voices and insects buzzing in the heavy, humid air. Every step brought new wonders and new dangers, from flowers that snapped at their fingers when they got too close to snakes that watched them from the branches above. Maya kept moving forward because she knew that turning back was not an option. After hours of hiking through the dense jungle, they finally reached a clearing where the trees gave way to ancient stone buildings covered in moss and vines. Maya gasped at the sight before her. This was not just a temple, but an entire city, forgotten by time and hidden from the world. The buildings rose up in layers, climbing the side of a mountain like giant stairs. And at the very top stood a structure larger than anything else, with a golden dome that still caught the sunlight despite centuries of neglect. "The Lost City," Lucas breathed, his eyes wide with amazement. "It actually exists." Maya walked forward as if pulled by an invisible force, her feet carrying her toward the heart of the ancient place. She felt something here, a connection that she could not explain but could not deny. It was like the city had been waiting for her, like it knew she would come. They entered through a gate made of stone carved with the same symbols that decorated the map, and beyond it lay a street lined with statues of people in strange clothes holding objects Maya did not recognize. Some held books, others held crystals, and a few held what looked like weapons of a design she had never seen. "These must have been important people," Lucas said, examining one of the statues closely. "Leaders or scholars or warriors." Maya stopped in front of one statue that stood apart from the others, placed on a platform in the center of a fountain that had long since run dry. The figure was a woman with kind eyes and flowing hair, and in her hand she held a sphere that seemed to glow faintly, even though it was made of stone. "Lucas," Maya called, her voice trembling. "Look at her face." Lucas came to stand beside her, and she heard him draw in a sharp breath. The statue looked exactly like Maya, as if someone had carved her face in stone 1,000 years before she was born. What did it mean, and how was it possible? Maya reached out to touch the statue's hand, and the moment her fingers made contact, the ground beneath them began to shake. "Run!" Lucas shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward one of the buildings. But Maya could not move because visions were flooding her mind, images of people and places and events from long ago. She saw the city as it once was, alive and full of light, and she saw her grandfather as a young man standing in this very spot. Then everything went dark. When Maya opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a cold stone floor inside one of the ancient buildings, with Lucas kneeling beside her looking more worried than she had ever seen him. "You were out for almost an hour," he said, helping her sit up slowly. "I did not know what to do, and I was so scared that I almost went back to get Captain Torres." Maya's head was spinning with the images she had seen, memories that did not belong to her flooding through her mind like water breaking through a dam. She had seen so many things during the time she was unconscious. The city had once been home to thousands of people who called themselves the Keepers, and they had possessed knowledge and abilities far beyond anything the modern world knew about. They could move objects with their minds, heal wounds with just a touch, and see glimpses of the future in their dreams. But something terrible had happened to them, a darkness that came from within their own community and destroyed everything they had built. "I know why we are here," Maya whispered, her voice weak but filled with certainty. "My grandfather was trying to protect something, and now it is my turn." Lucas helped her to her feet, keeping his arm around her shoulders to make sure she did not fall. "What did you see?" he asked, curiosity replacing some of his concern. Maya told him everything as they walked deeper into the city, following a path that she somehow knew without needing the map anymore. The visions had planted knowledge in her mind, showing her where to go and what to find. She explained that the keepers had discovered a source of incredible power hidden deep beneath the island. A crystal cave where energy from the center of the earth collected in formations that could grant extraordinary abilities to those who knew how to use them. But power always attracts those who would misuse it, and a group within the keepers had wanted to use the crystals to conquer the outside world instead of protecting the balance of nature. A terrible war had broken out between those who wanted peace and those who wanted power, and in the end, the peaceful keepers had been forced to hide the entrance to the crystal cave and scatter across the world to prevent the secret from falling into the wrong hands. "Your grandfather was one of them?" Lucas asked, amazement clear in his voice. Maya nodded, still struggling to understand it all herself. "He was a descendant of the original keepers, and he spent his whole life making sure the cave stayed hidden and the power stayed safe." "But why did he not tell you?" Lucas wondered aloud. He must have had a reason for keeping such an important secret. Maya thought about that question as they climbed a long staircase toward the Golden Dome building at the top of the city. Perhaps her grandfather had wanted to protect her from the burden of this responsibility, or perhaps he had been waiting for the right time to explain everything. She would never know for certain, but she believed that leaving her the map was his way of trusting her to continue his work. The Temple of Echoes was even more magnificent up close than it had appeared from below, with walls decorated in intricate patterns and doorways so tall the giants could have walked through them. Inside, the air was cool and filled with a strange humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The echoes," Maya said softly, remembering what the visions had shown her. "The voices of all the keepers who came before, trapped in the stones to guide those who come after." As if responding to her words, the humming grew louder and then began to form into something like speech, voices overlapping and weaving together in a chorus of whispers. "Welcome, child of the bloodline," the voices said in perfect harmony. "We have waited many generations for your arrival." Lucas stumbled backward in shock, but Maya stood firm because she had expected this. "I am here to learn the truth," she said to the empty temple. "Show me what I need to know." The walls began to glow with soft golden light, and images appeared on every surface like paintings coming to life. Maya saw the history of the keepers from the very beginning, how they had first discovered the crystal cave thousands of years ago, and how the power had changed them over time. She saw the great achievements they had accomplished, building cities and healing sickness and bringing harmony to the land. But then she saw the corruption begin, the way some keepers started to believe they were better than ordinary people and deserved to rule over them. The war was horrible to watch, with brother fighting against brother and mother against daughter, tearing apart families and destroying everything the keepers had worked so hard to create. In the end, a woman who looked just like Maya had led the last of the peaceful keepers to victory, sealing away the crystal cave with a powerful lock that could only be opened by someone of her bloodline. She was my ancestor, Maya realized, tears streaming down her face. And my grandfather was the last person protecting the secret. "But now you are here," the voices said, "and you must make a choice. The images faded, and a single doorway appeared at the back of the temple, glowing with brilliant blue light. Beyond that door lies the path to the crystal cave, the voices explained. You can seal it forever, destroying the power so that no one can ever misuse it again. Or you can claim the power for yourself and become the new guardian. Maya felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical force. If she destroyed the power, it will be gone forever, both the danger and the potential for good. But if she kept it, she would have to spend her life protecting it, just as her grandfather had done. There is another threat you must know about, the voices continued, their tone growing darker. Others have learned of this place, people who want the power for themselves, and they are coming. Maya felt ice form in her stomach at those words. Who? She demanded. How much time do we have? Before the voices could answer, a loud explosion echoed from somewhere outside the temple, shaking the ancient walls and sending dust raining down from the ceiling. Lucas ran to the doorway and looked outside, then turned back to Maya with fear written across his face. Boats, he said, his voice tight. At least 5 of them coming into the cove, and they are carrying armed soldiers. Maya understood then that her peaceful decision would have to wait. First, she would have to fight. Maya grabbed Lucas by the hand and pulled him toward the glowing doorway at the back of the temple because she knew they could not fight an army of armed soldiers with nothing but a knife and their bare hands. We have to find the crystal cave, she said as they ran through the doorway and into a tunnel that seemed to go straight down into the heart of the mountain. It is the only place where we might have a chance. The tunnel was dark, except for strange glowing moss that grew on the walls, giving off just enough light for them to see where they were going. Maya could hear shouting behind them as the soldiers entered the city below, their voices carrying through the still air like thunder rolling across a valley. They are going to catch us, Lucas panted, struggling to keep up with Maya as she raced down the uneven stone steps. We need to find somewhere to hide. But Maya knew that hiding would only delay the inevitable. These people had come too far and wanted the power too badly to give up, just because their targets had disappeared. She needed to reach the crystal cave and make her choice before it was too late. The tunnel twisted and turned through the rock, sometimes opening into vast caverns filled with underground lakes and forests of stone pillars, and other times narrowing so much that they had to squeeze through sideways. Maya led the way as if she had walked this path 100 times before, the knowledge from her visions guiding her feet even when her mind was clouded with fear. After what felt like hours, but might have been only minutes, they emerged into a chamber so beautiful that both Maya and Lucas stopped and stared in absolute wonder. The walls were covered with crystals of every color imaginable, red and blue and green and purple, and shades that had no names in any language. Light danced between them, bouncing from surface to surface and filling the cave with a glow that seemed alive. In the center of the chamber stood a single crystal larger than Maya herself, perfectly clear and pulsing with energy that made the air vibrate. This is it, Maya breathed, walking toward the great crystal as if drawn by a magnet. This is where all the power comes from. She could feel the energy washing over her skin, warm and tingling like standing in sunlight after a long winter. It was calling to her, wanting to join with her, to give her everything it had to offer. Lucas stayed near the entrance, watching with worried eyes. Maya, be careful, he called out. We do not know what that thing will do to you. But Maya was not afraid, not anymore. She understood now what her grandfather had always known, that some things are worth risking everything for, and that true strength comes not from power but from the courage to do what is right. She placed her hands on the great crystal and felt a surge of energy flow through her body. Visions came again, but this time she was not just watching, she was participating. She saw herself standing in this very spot, making the choice that would determine the fate of the world. In one future, she destroyed the crystal and the power vanished forever, leaving the world exactly as it was, neither better nor worse. In another future, she kept the power and became its guardian, spending her life protecting it from those who would misuse it. But there was a third option, one that the voices had not told her about. She could share the power with the world, giving everyone access to the energy and trusting humanity to use it wisely. It was the most dangerous choice of all because it meant believing in people, even when history had shown again and again that people could be cruel and selfish. Before she could decide, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, and Maya turned to see a group of soldiers pouring through the entrance with weapons raised. Leading them was a woman in a dark suit, her silver hair pulled back tight and her cold eyes fixed on Maya with unmistakable hunger. "Step away from the crystal, girl," the woman commanded in a voice as sharp as broken glass. "You have no idea what you are dealing with." Maya kept her hands on the crystal, feeling its energy continue to flow into her. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. "And how did you know about this place?" The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My name is Victoria Cross, and my family has been searching for this cave for 5 generations," she said, taking a step closer. "Your grandfather stole something that belonged to us, and now I am here to take it back." Maya felt anger rise in her chest at the woman's words. "My grandfather was a protector," she shot back. "He dedicated his life to keeping this power safe from people like you." Victoria laughed, a cold and hollow sound that echoed off the crystal walls. "Safe?" she repeated mockingly. "He was a thief and a coward who ran away instead of claiming his birthright, and he raised you to be just as weak and foolish as he was." Lucas moved to stand beside Maya, his fists clenched and his jaw tight with determination. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that must have been pounding in his heart. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Seize them both," she ordered her soldiers. "But do not damage the crystal. It is worth more than all of your lives combined." The soldiers advanced, their boots heavy on the stone floor. Maya knew she had only seconds to make her choice. She could feel the crystal waiting for her decision, ready to respond to whatever she commanded. She closed her eyes and thought of her grandfather, the quiet fisherman who had hidden such enormous secrets. She thought of all the people in the world who struggled every day, who suffered and hoped and dreamed of something better. And she thought of the keepers, both those who had used power for good and those who had let it corrupt them. In that moment, she understood what she had to do. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Victoria Cross. "You want power?" Maya said, her voice ringing clear through the chamber. "Then watch what true power looks like." She pressed her hands harder against the crystal and made her choice. Light exploded from the crystal in a blinding wave that swept through the chamber like a golden tide, and every soldier in the room was thrown backward as if pushed by an invisible giant. Victoria Cross screamed in rage as she tumbled across the stone floor, her perfect silver hair falling loose around her face. Maya stood at the center of the light, her hands still pressed against the great crystal, feeling power unlike anything she had ever imagined flowing through every part of her being. But she was not keeping it for herself. The energy passed through her body and then out again, spreading beyond the cave, beyond the island, racing across the ocean and over the continents like a sunrise circling the entire world. She was sharing the power with everyone, giving every person on Earth a small piece of what the keepers had once possessed. In her mind, she could see it happening. A sick child in a hospital suddenly feeling strength return to her body. A farmer looking at his dying crops and watching them begin to grow green again. A scientist staring at equations that suddenly made perfect sense. An artist picking up a brush and creating something more beautiful than anything they had made before. The power was spreading itself thin, giving everyone just enough to make their lives a little better, but not enough for anyone to use it as a weapon. It was Maya's grandfather's dream come true, the thing he had never been brave enough to do himself. When the light finally faded, Maya collapsed to her knees, exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. Lucas rushed to her side and caught her before she could fall completely. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Maya smiled weakly, her eyes barely able to stay open. "I gave it away," she whispered. "All of it to everyone." Victoria Cross pushed herself up from the floor, her elegant suit torn and her face twisted with fury. "You stupid girl!" she screamed, lunging toward Maya with her hands outstretched like claws. "You have destroyed everything." But before she could reach Maya, the crystal behind them began to crack, and Victoria froze in place. Great fissures spread across its surface like lightning frozen in glass, and then, with a sound like 1,000 bells ringing at once, it shattered into 1,000,000 tiny pieces that fell to the ground like snow. The power was gone, distributed across the world, and no one would ever be able to gather it all again. Victoria fell to her knees, staring at the pile of crystal dust that had once been worth more than anything else on Earth. "No," she moaned, picking up handfuls of the glittering powder and watching it slip through her fingers. "No, no, no." Her soldiers stood around her looking confused and lost, unsure of what to do now that the treasure they had come for no longer existed. Maya forced herself to stand, leaning heavily on Lucas for support. "It is over," she said to Victoria, her voice gentle despite everything the woman had tried to do. "The power belongs to everyone now, and you will never be able to take it for yourself." Victoria looked up at Maya with eyes full of hatred and despair. "You have no idea what you have done," she hissed. "The world was not ready for this kind of power, and you have doomed us all." Maya shook her head, feeling a strange certainty settle in her heart. "My grandfather believed that people are good," she said. "He believed that if you trust them, they will rise to meet that trust, and I believe it too." Victoria had no response to that, and she simply knelt there among the crystal dust, broken in a way that went far beyond her physical body. Maya and Lucas left her there with her soldiers and made their way back up through the tunnel. The climb was harder than the descent had been, especially with Maya so weak from what she had done, but they helped each other and took their time. When they finally emerged from the Temple of Echoes, the sun was setting over the lost city, painting the ancient buildings in shades of orange and gold. They walked slowly through the empty streets, past the statues of the keepers who had lived and loved and fought in this place so long ago. Maya stopped one last time at the statue of her ancestor, the woman who looked just like her. "Thank you," she said softly, reaching out to touch the stone hand. "I hope I made you proud." The statue did not respond, of course, but Maya felt a warmth in her chest that told her everything she needed to know. Captain Torres was waiting for them at the beach, pacing nervously beside his boat. When he saw them emerge from the jungle, his weathered face split into a wide smile of relief. "I was starting to think I would have to leave without you," he called out. "But I knew Chun's granddaughter would find a way." Maya hugged the old captain, surprising him and herself. "Thank you for bringing us here," she said. "Thank you for keeping your promise to my grandfather." The journey home was calmer than the journey out, with fair winds and gentle waves carrying them across the blue ocean. Maya spent most of the time sleeping, recovering from the incredible effort of distributing the crystal's power, while Lucas kept her company and Captain Torres guided the boat. When they finally reached their hometown, Maya looked at the familiar streets and buildings with new eyes. She could see the subtle changes that had already begun. People seemed happier, kinder, more alive than they had been before. The power was working, spreading hope and possibility through the world one tiny miracle at a time. Lucas walked her home as the stars came out above them. "What will you do now?" he asked, stopping at her front door. Maya thought about the question for a long moment. She could go back to her ordinary life, reading books in the library and walking on the beach, pretending that none of this had ever happened. Or she could become something more, using her knowledge of the Keepers to help guide humanity as they learn to use their new gifts. "I think my work is just beginning," she said finally, looking up at the stars with a smile. "But tonight, I'm going to sleep, and tomorrow I'm going to eat breakfast with my mother and tell her stories about my grandfather that she never knew." Lucas smiled back at her, and Maya knew that whatever came next, she would not have to face it alone. She had found her purpose, honored her grandfather's memory, and changed the world. And she was only 16 years old. The future stretched out before her like an ocean of possibilities. And for the first time in her life, Maya-chan was not afraid of what lay beyond the horizon.